couple more. Let's see here. So how many, I don't have a list in front of me, Vonnie. How many do we need? Do you know?
Back here.
So we're missing at least 4.
Bob Teeter's joining.
Good.
So we have 15 on the committee, so we need 8 then, if I'm doing my math right.
Yeah, that would be right. Okay. Need 8, and we have Pat. Or
Andy's joining.
Andy. We have Bob Teeter. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
My Purple Road's coming in.
Good, that's 6. Need 2 more.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello. How are you?
Come off the screen.
Carson, is Marlene joining us too?
She is, and she'll be here in just a moment. She had a little computer meltdown. She's
Uh-oh.
frantically trying to click some buttons to get working.
No problem. We're going to wait a couple minutes since we're shy of a quorum at this point.
I'll be right back. I just got to send a fax.
Sure.
Haven't heard of someone say that in a long time.
They do still exist, those things.
True, that is true.
It's actually something, it's like a standard on our architecture drawings. We have our fax number, but I usually go in there and I remove that because I don't want to get a fax I'm not expecting and not know where it's at.
Think you got it, Bob. You have 8. Bob, you're on mute.
Bonnie, are we ready to go?
Yes.
All right. So at 6:34 on my clock, the meeting is called to order. Thank you all for being here. I don't believe this evening we have any minutes to approve. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Marlene and Carson and Brian for yet another exciting adventure in the Facilities Advisory Committee of Sayusla High School. We have some important business to do tonight, and I would like to start off with a few remarks, if I may. So in the past months or years, for that matter, this committee has reviewed a lot of possible facility projects for the district. We've looked at the elementary school, at moving the kindergarten into the main building, adding classrooms, replacing an older part of the building, improving the drop-off and pickup, putting utilities underground, pardon me, and some other things. At the high school, I'm skipping over the middle school because we haven't really talked about major items there, but we have talked at the high school about replacing the entire facility, repairing aging systems, HVAC, electrical, et cetera, adding on to the existing structure, office space, classrooms, lunch facility, auditorium, et cetera. Most recently, Mike brought to our attention the need for more classroom space coming up in September. And we have the funds to pay for some classrooms. We'll get into that momentarily. But we certainly have the space to pay for 2 modular classrooms, which was really, I think, his initial request. We need 2 more classrooms. That would not be a long-term, but rather a short-term fix. But that proposal has grown over time. And last week, we discussed 6 or 8 new classrooms, including administrative offices. And these are pretty rough numbers because I haven't gone back to look at the exact numbers, but my recollection is we were talking as well about another 15 million or so as possible internal repairs to systems. And I remember hearing a number of around 26 million at some point. Others may wish to correct that, and I am going to turn to Carrie momentarily here for some number thoughts. It is possible that a bond would be required. As we consider making a recommendation to the board, and I hope that we can do so this evening, because something does need to move forward. I think we need to consider the following. First of all, a big project would probably not be ready for the fall term and might not be ready in the 22-23 school year, although again, I am speculating on that. Others may have thoughts. Certainly not for September, as far as I can tell. Without more classroom space in September, we would need to remodel interior spaces to accommodate the need for more classrooms. And some of that might have to be a bit extensive. A bond request now might or might not be approved and might preclude any more bond requests for some time to come. Number 4, significant add-ons and repairs to the existing facility could hinder the possibility of replacing the high school building in the eyes of voters. And number 5, my question then is, are we ready to accept those possibilities, or do we want to keep our options open and meet only the immediate need for now while continuing to ponder long-term options? And I will say that I say these things having given considerable thought over the last week in particular to what it is that the consequences of whatever we may recommend to the board, to the extent that the board follows our recommendations. I think it's a very important recommendation if we're able to make one this evening. And I want to make sure that we've considered these various possibilities. I do want to read a brief statement. Susie Lacer was not able to join us this evening, but she wrote me the following. She says, I agree with the concerns raised tonight, this was from last week, regarding expending significant funds on the high school now and the impact that may have on future requests to repair or replace the high school. I like Mike's suggestion to do individual classroom buildings that would address the urgent space needed for students while offering some future flexibility. And to Andy's point about wanting to show successful completion of a small project, perhaps we could consider doing a project at the elementary school to demonstrate that rather than something at the high school, even though we all know that the high school is the biggest need. So having said that, I would like to turn to the following. First, to Mike for a review of how he sees the needs here at the high school. Second, to Carrie for a review of funds available. And third, then to Marlene for an update on the long-range facilities report and further thoughts on what I've said here. So Mike, could I ask you to talk a little bit about the needs as you see them here?
Certainly. We have a very large freshman class right now. We have a larger freshman class coming in next year. I think that if I recall, it's the two largest cohorts in the district will be freshmen and sophomores next year. That's coupled at the same time. I really like to add more academic rigor in the form of another social studies credit to our course catalog, to our graduation requirements, which would require a new social studies teacher and a space for that teacher to teach. Right now, all current classrooms in the building are in use, and I would be hard pressed to find a classroom for a substitute teacher, for a new social studies teacher. I'm also currently short one science teacher. So if I'm able to find a science teacher next year to round out our science offerings and hire a social studies teacher to add to our social studies offerings, I'm going to be 2 classrooms short and in a world of hurt when it comes to trying to find places for those students. I'd really like to avoid a situation where I have students scheduled in off periods into a study hall or some other arrangement for a non-academic time just to clear a way for other classes to take place. I do have some options that I'm considering internally, neither of which are really particularly attractive options, but we'd have to consolidate a couple of other programs and we could do so by renovating the lecture hall to get through if need be. But I too would like to know sooner than later what I need to put on the facilities team in terms of a pretty substantial project to renovate that lecture hall for one, and to move a couple of other classrooms as well. So really it's a crunch for space. That neither my internal changes nor additional 2 classrooms does anything to change the security in the building, to change the airflow problems, the heating and air conditioning problems where we've got such frigid temperatures at one part and such warm temperatures at another part. Those are completely unaddressed in this change. It's simply adding to the floor plan with a couple of modular classrooms to allow for academic expansion.
Thank you. Carrie, could we turn to you for a moment? Was it Dina? Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Carrie.
I have to admit, Bob, I'm not prepared for this. I didn't
Okay, I'm
realize
sorry.
this is what we were talking about
I'm
tonight.
sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I thought we were talking long-range facility plan and kind of maybe dipping our toe into what the updated costs look like. So I have no figures
Okay, that's fine.
in front of me. What I will say is I don't think that we would be prepared to make a recommendation tonight unless there's been discussion that I'm unaware of. I think the recommendation from the board was to look into this, and I think what we would need to know is what our options are in order for us to make a recommendation. So I'm sorry, I'm just a little unprepared for this conversation.
Carrie, and you and I just talked a day or two ago, so I didn't mean to catch you by surprise. All I was really looking for was what we had talked at a previous meeting about funds that we could expend without going out to a bond measure or going to external funds. And I just wondered if you happen to have an approximate number off the top of your head. Do you recall what that was? I know you have some funds.
I don't, because we've been talking about ESSER funds and whatnot, and so it's a little bit of a bigger conversation about how much we would have available. You know, we've been talking around the $1.52 million range. You know, we have, like I said, we've got our ending fund balance. We're sitting at the end of June 30th, we're at 5.4 million. So those are the kinds of things the board would have to decide how much of that they would want to dedicate to capital projects. We've got roughly $700,000 in our debt service fund that we can transfer over to our general fund, and that is for capital improvements only. We've got roughly, again, 700,000 in our construction excise tax fund. And then there is, you know, facilities grants, up to 8% of project costs that you do receive back. It's not a competitive grant. It's through ODE for furnishings. That's what I'm thinking of the top of my head. And I'm sorry, I just don't have all of that stuff jotted down right with me. So
No, that's actually exactly what I was looking for.
perfect. Okay, thank you.
We're good. Thank
Okay.
you. Okay. Marlene, can you tell us about the long-range facilities plan, where you are with it, and what are the next steps with that? Yeah, because that's what you've been working on for a while. Is that right? Okay. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Thank you. Using the facilities assessment report and the scope identified in their email, that's not what we want. Carson and I have been working together on trying to help prioritize. So we've already identified the scope, and this is a summary of that. And I think this is what you alluded to a little bit earlier. You know, this 33 million, that's, you know, all of the repairs, all the planning, kind of the wish list and everything all in. This number here that we came back to you with tonight, so it's not necessarily a recommendation, but this is something what we talked about in the previous meeting as far as trying to prioritize and figure out what could we focus on. The big difference with this is, of course, the majority of the scope that has been identified to date for both repair and new, based on our targets, are at the high school. So this sort of does two things. It takes all of the repair and renovation work out of the mix for the existing high school, but it does include the planning costs for the high school addition. So this number down here, this 11.9 million, that number represents what we recommend in these kind of peach colored squares to do on all of the sites. So we're talking about focusing on exterior envelope, on mechanical, and on accessibility. It does leave out the high school from those three categories. So we're talking about the elementary, the middle school, and the district office. So these are the numbers that we end up with as far as the costs associated with capturing the work in those three categories, excluding the high school. But we are solving the capacity issue for the high school by including costs for the classroom addition that we looked at last time. And this cost is different than what we showed last time for two reasons. One, we did go through and revise the plan slightly to fit a little bit better with the program that was discussed. So 2 less classrooms, so smaller building. And then we also got some cost per square foot information confirmed from the modular builder, the factory built company. So we were able to lower the cost per square foot. We had it a little bit conservatively high. So the assumption is this stuff in green would be built on site. All of this could be built as factory built construction and trucked in. And so there's a savings in the overall costs for that. When we go through and look at the numbers, again, this is that same spreadsheet that we looked at last time that is just the cost for this classroom addition. And it's broken down into the different categories. So about 11,000 square feet for the building area overall. Building construction costs are coming in right at 4 million, a little bit over, with some site costs of about 4.5. And then once you put in project costs, a little over 6 million for that building. So that's what's plugged in here and here. These soft costs are for the projects, are for the addition and for all of this work that's indicated back there. what we were trying to do is target a scope of work that meets as many of the needs as we can for the district. The real question, as is always the case, this doesn't do anything for the high school's existing condition, right? Including there's some big numbers in there for electrical. It also doesn't do anything for the elementary school electrical or some of the site work, which was identified as well. Those are a couple big numbers. From our discussion last week, we decided that those were not going to be our priority in this first pass, to at least look at the number and see where it lands. So our goal out of this process is to try and identify what we feel is the most reasonable first step in the plan. I think all of this work identified is all included in the long range plan. So there's two parts to it. We've identified everything, and then we also want to identify what we need to do first, what the priority is and what the first steps are. So this was our attempt, based on our conversation last week, on prioritizing those things. Are there any questions on that? Oh, I'm sorry, Bob, you have your hand up.
No. Oh, which Bob? There we go.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, sorry, Bob Teeter.
Yeah.
So this is kind of directed at both Marlene, Mike, and Carrie. So going back to Mike's comments about doing some retrofits to accommodate growth, is there a cost comparison to doing that and addressing some of the mechanical issues, doing that compared with this addition? What are the costs versus those two? And then am I also correct in understanding that addition, if we do build, change, whatever, that those are movable and salvageable to whatever we do in the future? Or would those, if we built a new school or built retrofitted the entire high school, would those have to be demolished and no longer used? So it's kind of a twofold question there.
So, yeah, no, that's good. So the first question, the screen's not showing up quite right. Are you guys able to see my screen with the previous presentation on it?
Yes.
So some construction photos? Okay.
Yes.
So to answer your last question first, Bob, they are bringing the buildings in kind of in pieces, and they are stitching them together on site at that scale. So the 6 classrooms, for example. So this is two halves of, it's taller than a classroom, but it would essentially also be two halves of the classroom. They're stitched together and they're put on the foundation. So they are stitching them together with siding, and they're stitching them together on the interior with the wall finish and the flooring. So it's not, you can't necessarily take them apart again, but you could look at it like house movers, right? Who would go, and instead of taking them apart again, you would keep all 6 classrooms together as a building, and you could pick it up and move it at the scale that it was put together and assemble that on the site as a whole building en masse somewhere else on the site.
Okay.
Did that answer that piece? Okay, so that was the easier part of the question. I do want to get to the other one, which talks about some of the other options for the high school and how they compare in cost, if I'm remembering the question right. So a couple meetings back, mid-December, we did go through and look at kind of 3 different options for the high school, kind of solving the needs and looking at some kind of repair and renovation costs, if that makes sense. And there's these 3 cost breakdowns here, and I think we have some drawings that align with that. So option 1, right, it's pretty scorched earth. This is just replace the whole thing entirely with a new building. Option 2 was a partial replacement where we're still keeping the gym complex, the athletic complex. And then option 3, that was sort of a phased approach where we're looking at replacing that front kind of science wing, putting in a new admin and library there, 2-story. So then we'll go back to, and these are the costs that we came up with for those. So,
right, but I was kind
again,
of thinking, I'm kind of wondering, Mike mentioned the retrofitting the lecture hall and those things. I'm talking about the immediate needs for this upcoming school year. do we know what those
Sorry,
costs
I
are?
apologize.
So I'm wondering if, which direction to go with Mike's, option of retrofitting and addressing the mechanical is more cost effective, or doing this addition is more cost effective.
That is a good
Mike's-
question,
Mike's
and I
immediate
don't
needs.
think I have, yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer for the costs associated with the renovation. Renovation costs, if we're talking about fixtures and finishes and maybe like taking out tiered seating and flattening a floor, if it doesn't affect structural, not significant costs. Those are definitely going to be much more manageable costs. And we're seeing a lot of districts using ESSER funds and some other funds to kind of help with that. And mechanical systems, some districts, I can't speak to whether this is accurate or not, but I've heard rumors that some COVID funding has been helping upgrade existing mechanical systems. So relative to the cost, I'm going to kick that one over to Brian and Amoresco for the mechanical in particular. I do know that there are some concerns about lead times on mechanical equipment in particular. So that would be my first concern, is getting that done by the summer. And I think, Carrie, are you trying to say
Yeah,
something?
I
there?
was going to say, we did remodel one side of our lecture hall. I don't have those costs in front of me because we just started talking about this, or I just started talking or heard about this. So we were able to, Bob, put it within our regular budget. We were able to have Reed and our maintenance crew do that. So I think it's a really good direction to go, kind of regardless of what we decide for an addition, because I think it's manageable to get the space in there, get it usable. And I think it can always be used, regardless of if we end up going with an addition or what those decisions might be. So that would be my thought is, I think there's an immediate need and it's something we can manage internally.
Yeah, and my concern is, we need to support Mike and what he's going through there and addressing those needs. At the same time, always have to kind of be cognizant of those community perceptions if we're going to be prepping for a bond ask. So. I think Pat's got his hand up.
Pat, it looks like you've got your hand up, sir.
Yeah, Marlene, on the ESSER funds, it's our understanding at Bethel, we did use ESSER funds for mechanical upgrades. So I'm sure you check into it, it's acceptable.
Yep, and I do want to add to the
Yeah,
lead
seems very
times.
legitimate. Mhm.
Currently, if we were to move forward with any sort of modernization, we are already too late to move to construction this summer for mechanical equipment. Lead times are pushing 8 to 9 months.
Ooh. Wow.
So if we were to do this, it would probably move to next summer. We would want to start ordering equipment as soon as we know what the scope and the plan would be.
Let me just clarify something, because that Carrie said a few minutes ago about decision making. What I'm concerned about at this point is not that we make any long-term decisions in terms of remodel of the high school versus replacement of the high school or anything of that sort. What I'm concerned about is Mike's need for September. And if that's going to be whatever we do, that has to be decided pretty quickly, I think, by the board. And I don't know if the board needs, if the board needs to approve expenditures for remodel in interior lecture hall sort of thing, that's a no. But if I assume, and maybe this isn't true either, if 2 modular classrooms are brought in and it can be paid for from funds we have in hand, does that need board approval?
I would, Andy, you want to take this one?
Well, again, facilities are the domain of the board, period, right? And we're also talking about an expenditure that's going to be in the range that could easily be over, the internal spending limit that Carrie and I can approve on our own. And so there'll be questions about, again, where this goes and what it looks like, which is all within the board. And we just can't plop 2 buildings on the lawn that have 4 classrooms in them. And Marlene had a great solution with the 6 classrooms, and that piece with the integrated office in the hallway is a piece that we had never thought of. And again, that's what creates this additional piece that's has to be considered by the board, because that really, I mean, that moves on the current building, and that creates a great deal of permanence. And again, it's not, it makes this more than just temporary space in between now and a bond and a remodel, right? It's a new wrinkle that's quite different than anything else we've really kind of put on the deck so far. Again, we had talked about having a controlled entry in and out with, like a control gate and some sort of, covered walkway entry. But having it integrated like that, creates a whole new layer that we just hadn't kind of put together. I mean, it's a great solution, but it's much more permanent than we kind of fathomed in just getting ourselves 4 or 6 classrooms.
Andy or Frank, can you tell us what is the board expecting to do, and in what time frame on whatever? I don't know how to ask this. Something needs to be done.
Bob, I have a feeling I know where you're going.
Okay, thanks.
I think the board is, and again, I can't speak for everybody, but I think we understand the urgency and that we would like to do what we can to accommodate Principal Harkleroad's necessity. So, after last night, before last night, I would have thought it might be easier, but it may be actually harder than I first perceived to ask for money, especially if we can't find it within our own means, within what we have sitting around in some manner. And I just, again, myself personally, I would be real reluctant to want to spend $6 million on a building that in a few years we have aspirations to replace, if not sooner. It's a, this is my 3rd meeting, folks. So I'm only, I'm kind of speaking off the cuff, but sincerely and trying to be as comprehensive as possible.
Yeah, Mike?
I apologize. My whole system just crashed there. So I'm sorry if I missed something, and this might be repetitive. Marlene, the plans we looked at last time, is that a feasible stage 1 of a wing replacement plan? Or if we were going to do a wing replacement, like the slow new high school over time, would that be the starting point, or would we start somewhere else? That's a big question.
So if I got it, no, that's good. I mean, I think if it were only up to me, and I'm looking at that existing building and where best to start, I honestly think if we are talking about the first phase of a more permanent kind of phased replacement of the high school, I would take down the science wing, right? I would replace the science classrooms. I would put the admin right in the front there. I mean, maybe I can share my screen again and we can take a look at what I'm talking about. And I would start, rather than off to the side as much, I would start here, right? We don't have quite the whole plan, but we know that these science classrooms are not functional. This is a central location. This is more prominent kind of on the site as you come in from both sides. So you could create a really nice front door. You could do, I think that other option that we had up here had the admin and the library as a 2-story kind of addition in the front there. This piece gets you 4 new science classrooms and 8 2, 4, 6, 8 new general education classrooms, a front office, and a library. I mean, that's a big start, and that's like the full meal deal. That's a huge piece. You don't necessarily have to take on all of that. The trick is that you need the administration. You need the front door at the front.
Right.
So if it were up to me, and if money were no object, I would start with this piece, because I think you can make a better attempt at kind of continuing to grow the building around this incrementally. We're showing the theater addition, the auditorium, kind of developing the CTE in music and art, kind of all built around this. We get to keep the gymnasiums, and we do this with the temporary modulars that we showed over here. And then we still have, I still think there's some opportunity with the commons and kind of this central area in the courtyard, to take a closer look at that and see how we could best utilize that. So.
Okay. So,
Okay, can we go back? Okay, because I think we've created a monster in trying to create an efficiency. We thought we could capture, again, moving the office up front while having the space. Again, we have a need for immediate space and moving the office up front. But office up front was always going to be part of a new plan, right? Again, with that having to be incorporated into the building, if modular space is the immediate need for next fall, that just has to be its piece on its own. And that's something that we can do on our own, and then look at how the office works as part of a restructure later. Because if we're talking about an incremental remodel, we're still going to need modular space, and none of that gets before the fall, right? So I think we need to take a step back, and again, Mike needs modular space, and then we had this again. It's a great idea to put the other part on, but we're going to get so far afield, we're not going to get anything done before we need that immediate classroom need or a bond, and we're going to wind up again, great aspirations with no accomplishment. And so, either in the south lawn, either in the southeast lawn or the north or the northeast lawn, how do we incorporate 6 modular classrooms to give space for next year or as quick as we can? And then use that as part of our, again, modular workaround, right? Because if we're talking about doing something, I would say beyond $4 million, which again, we could cobble together between our ESSER funds, cash on hand, and like a small commercial loan, which I think the board would be willing to do, or willing to consider at least, for incremental space or temporary space. That's as far as they would go. But once we get beyond that, we're into too big of a project that accomplishes anything for next year.
What do we gain internally in space if we move the administration out in front to create a new building for it, office space for it? What do we gain in the interior of the school there that we presently have administration in?
We gain 1 classroom if we knock out the internal walls between the counseling area and the small study hall room, which is really funny. And again, that's assuming that that can be done, because there's at least 1 load-bearing pillar in that wall, because that's on that split space between the commons, between the mall and the library.
So if it's possible, then it's only 1 room.
Right, and it's possible that it's only 1 room, right? That was going to be one of those extra little bonuses to this.
Right.
And again, because that means the counselors come downstairs onto the main floor. And so, again, we wound up, again, trying to create a unicorn, and I don't know what we created. We wound up putting too many, horns and hooves on this beast right now.
Andy, you're talking in terms of 6 modulars. And the immediate need, as far as I've heard from Mike, is 2.
Well, again, every module, again, I'm thinking of a modular having 2 units within it. Right. And so if we need 4 classrooms, that's 2 modular units. Depending on how you buy them, right? Again, you can get single deck, single room, or you get 2 units per building, right? It's how you configure them. I always think of them as doubles.
Bob, if I had 2 doubles, so a total of 4 classrooms,
Okay.
I'd use them. We could gain some significant comforts at that point. It would be more than just making it fit. Then I could be much better use of classroom space.
I mean, I don't mean to rain on this parade and be Debbie Downer, but if we're going to get something ready for next year, anything that involves altering the main building doesn't get us there, right? That's the, I think, the unfortunate stark reality of what we're looking at. And I think it puts us at a cost threshold that I don't think the board would be willing to consider moving forward. So.
I'd like to hear from those of you that haven't weighed in yet on this. Dina, what are your thoughts?
I after the last meeting and Mike's his closing remarks, I felt very much like he did. I think that if we can meet the immediate need for this fall, that's where we should go. And then we still keep working on something better for our high school. But I think what we saw last week was probably a little bigger than, it was certainly bigger than what I was anticipating or that I thought we were discussing. And so I think from my point of view right now, we should make a decision. I guess the decision that we have to make is to ask the board, let's do these modulars with what the district can afford. And Mike, the high school will have what they need. And then we keep working as a facility committee on something better.
Okay, good. Thank you.
About if I could, I also think that the small, modest move now might play into a grander campaign to change the mindset about this high school in the greater community. I think if we are seen as, and I'm doing my best to be respectful here for how things have perceptions that have formed over time. But I don't think most of the public recognizes the need that is there and recognizes how hard off this school is. And certainly they don't see that match is worth it for the standards that they see or the perceptions that they have of how the school is performing. I think we're slowly beginning to change the culture of the school, beginning to change the image of the school. COVID is not helping us. That's actually going a different direction. But I think if the community sees we're trying to add academic rigor, and that's why we need more space. We're trying to increase the standards for kids. We're trying to raise the profile of a Siuslaw High School learner. And that can be accomplished through an investment in, modest investment now in infrastructure, gain some momentum, gain some traction, demonstrate that we're good stewards of the public dollar, that we're good for kids, that we're producing a good product. And then in a couple of years' time, make the ask again for something more significant.
Yeah, and I think we're also doing what we can to meet the growth aspirations of our community at large. And that seems to always not be part of the conversation. We are incredibly aggressive at trying to grow our town. And we don't have the same fervor to ensure that our educational process is in line to meet that growth potential. We're talking about putting a Band-Aid on an already existing problem that doesn't really advance us beyond next semester, or in the event we grow as a community, as a part of the county, which I expect that we will. I don't see how we won't.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Russ, your thoughts?
Thanks, Bob, and hello all. Yeah, this feels like a critical junction in a lot of ways. I've been on, I think, 3 iterations of this committee over the years. I think it's really critical to meet the immediate needs that have been expressed really well by Mike. It's vital to do that for sure. And it makes sense to me to do what we can to contain costs to just those immediate needs at this time. There's just so much we don't know yet, and not just about what the board may approve, what the public will vote for, but we don't know how the pandemic is going to end or if it's going to end. We don't know how the political winds may blow. We have no idea, under any ordinary circumstances, I'd say we got to do stuff now or costs are going to keep escalating, and they certainly have through this pandemic, but it's such a rate that I don't know if they might fall back some. That is a possibility. We literally just don't know a lot of answers to really big and important questions. Even the planning costs, I appreciate all these consultants that are here tonight, and they've done excellent work. So not to minimize their work or to suggest that they're doing anything wrong. They're doing everything exactly right, just what we've asked. But if we start planning ahead now for what a high school might look like, we have no idea what that's going to look like. We might end up paying 2 or 3 times for the same services essentially as things evolve and change. Yeah, so that's what I think. I think we attack the immediate and keep working like crazy to get this done.
Thank you. Chris?
I agree with
thoughts?
Russ. We have these immediate needs, but we also have to look long-term. And I think, hopefully we'll be out of this pandemic sometime soon. We have to worry about workforce for Florence and people to hopefully work in career level jobs locally, but also in other jobs that will allow them to make a good wage. And that's the point I think we need to make to the community, given we have so many retirees. But if we don't train the kids and help them realize their dreams, the community will suffer.
Thank you. Bob Teeter.
Yeah, I just want to, echo, these last few comments. Yeah, we've got to do what we can to address these immediate needs. At the same time as Russ, and Mike and Dean have all, mentioned that there's, we've got to be aware of the perception out there. So any modular, anything visible from the street has got to be done in a way that I think it doesn't lock us into a certain footprint, and also doesn't give the perception that, well, we solved all our problems, and so everything else is just icing on the cake. And I don't want to also, from the kids' point of view, to do this, oh, poor pity me type of project in order to get everybody to feel sorry for us. It's kind of a balancing act there. But, as far as, I'm really curious about Mike's plans on doing some internal retrofits, as well as, adding modulars that can stay within a budget that we don't have to go through a huge process. Speed is of the essence here. That's what I feel.
Mike, did you want to respond to that at all? In terms of, I mean, would it be your inclination if we add the modulars to also do the remodeling like over the summer or?
So I can, I'm a little more prepared to speak to this time than I was last, but I do ask for those of you in Florence to kind of keep this buttoned up. As soon as I start talking about moving classrooms and places and teachers around, I know this from the elementary school days, all oars are rowing in that direction and people start to lose their mind. So what I'm thinking of is consolidating the 2 special education classrooms, where one is a large classroom, one's a small classroom, into one of our mega classrooms. That does give me some instructional efficiency. It gives me some supervision, some overall program efficiency, I think, is also built in. So that's a change I can defend, even if I don't need the footprint improvement. That would free up one classroom potentially for a new social studies teacher. The next idea is to strip out the old lecture hall, which is significantly less than an ideal classroom space. We renovated one of the lecture halls a number of years ago, and it is one of the least desirable classrooms in the building in which to teach. It's difficult to make rounds, it's difficult to support kids, it's difficult to maneuver, but it is serviceable. So those 2 changes, combining special education and relocating the Health Ops program through that change, and then redoing the lecture hall, would give me some space that I can get by. That plus probably a science teacher who would rove through different classrooms on other teachers' prep period. So a teacher who doesn't have a home classroom, but would be living in different classrooms throughout the day for probably 6 or 7 periods. Those would get me through, but it would be clumsy and it would be far less operational next year in terms of just general flow through the building and how a student's day progresses, from the 1st to 7th period. Would be clumsy with that, but again, serviceable. So if nothing happens, I would do that. Even if we do add the modular classrooms, I'm still likely to combine the special ed programs into a single room, strictly for instructional efficiency.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, how do you have now I visited your special ed classes while I was there a couple of weeks ago, and you have 2 rooms. How do you segregate the students in each room? Was there a difference that I didn't notice, something so subtle that I missed there?
There is, and sorry about that, Frank. The classroom that we visited on your tour was our life skills classroom. That classroom would stay as is. I'm speaking of the 2 learning resource centers, special education students that are drop-in for certain periods a day for students with learning plans, but not for students with special needs. The special needs classroom would stay as is, but I would consolidate the learning centers into a single room.
Okay, gotcha. Misunderstood. Thank you.
Pat, your thoughts?
Well, immediate needs for next year, sounds like, Mike, you got a pretty good angle on some rearranging and some interior renovations. Has anybody looked at the availability of modular units and the time it would take to set them? Is there, seeing that type of work done, I don't know that you can get one pair of those in and set by the spring. The way the wheels turn sometimes, just availability and labor force out there. But what I see, you're on the right track here. Get a couple of those in and address your immediate needs. When I first saw your bond going for $100 million, when I first really started hanging around here, I went, man, that's a lot of money. Florence is really bold, asking for that kind of money. Bethel, we did the same thing. We went for 100 million, and really it's not that much money. So I think in the short term, you address the high school's needs with these portables, and then you look at your bond as a separate thing, and maybe, like you've talked about, phasing it and taking on some of this stuff. perhaps not, I'd stay away from the portables myself. I would do a wing, just like you were talking about earlier, and just try, we did with that with Willamette High School back in the 70s. They burned down the cafeteria, so we had an immediate need. So we built the cafeteria. And then from there, we phased it over probably 4 different bonds over the next, probably 10 years. And we're able to kind of chisel it down small enough to where it was acceptable to the taxpayers. And they saw what we were doing out there. And we had really good response. We have real big support out there for the school. So hopefully, maybe not the sticker shock on a big bond, but that's my 2 cents on it.
Okay, thank you. Helpful. Marlene or Carrie or Brian, Carson, do any of you want to speak to the issue of modulars, what's out there, timing, etc.?
So I know personally with all of the work that's happening, there's this modular shuffle that's going on with projects finishing and new projects needing them in large scale, 10, 12, 14 to a site. I think not knowing the timing is the question, whether we could get a couple, but I know like Salem Kaiser School District is offloading quite a few modulars now that their buildings are coming back online. A couple other districts, I think Hillsborough already kind of went through all of theirs. I think there's an opportunity to possibly get one, relocated from one school to another. The trick for us with that is the jurisdictional process, as silly as that sounds. Oftentimes they require us to go through land use for that. Even though it's temporary, we still have to go through and kind of make sure the neighbors are going to be okay with the site impacts and the infrastructure and the added capacity, which technically does then require additional parking if we're going kind of all the way down the line of what those requirements would be for that. That's kind of the most extreme version. Oftentimes, if you commit to them being temporary, of course, everybody in the back of their mind when they hear temporary and modulars, we all know the worst case scenario of 20 to 30 years, right? I mean, yeah. So for me, I think there may be modulars out there that we could get, and I think the timeline, rather than having them set by the spring, Pat, I think maybe you were thinking of procuring them by the spring, having them set and ready for class by September, I think is our timeline, unless I'm, so we would have a little bit more time. We would essentially have through the summer to get them set, get them permitted, and get, any sort of infrastructure needed to them. I think that is probably going to be the only viable option, I hate to say it, at this point for getting space for kids by this fall, short of your other option, Mike, which is kind of scrambling the inside of the space you already have. And I think that could be done as an interior TI in time. The thing that would impact that timing wise is what Brian mentioned, is the lead time on the equipment, the mechanical equipment. But if we're not replacing entire mechanical units and we're just kind of modifying existing ductwork and turning, 2 rooms into one, or well, we're not even really doing that necessarily. If it's a light enough touch, we may not have as severe of lead time issues, and it could be done as a renovation this summer. It would be tight, but I think that could be doable also.
How soon do we need to act? How soon would you need us to be able to give you the okay to proceed?
So the land use process sometimes can take upwards of 6 months, depending on the jurisdiction, right, from start to finish. And sometimes they'll let you start in the process in there with that. So that within the next couple of months, we probably need to get an idea of where they were going to go and what we're trying to do to at least do some sort of submittal with the city. If I'm getting my timing right, March puts us at, 6 months out is September, right? So realistically, we would probably need to submit something to the city within the next month conservatively to say, and to give us enough time to go through that process. Again, that's worst case, but they can take upwards of that 180 days, and they often do with how there's COVID impacts across the board.
Okay, so our next board meeting is on February 9th. And in March, it's also on the 9th. So you would need the board's approval to proceed by the 9th. Is that by the 9th of March or so? Would that work for you?
So I'm sorry, Frank, I'm not sure if you're asking me.
Yes,
I
I'm
feel like
sorry,
This is
Marlene.
not my, no, that's
Yeah.
okay. I feel like this is like, I'm saying yes to something that I really should not have any control over. If we knew by February 9th that was the direction we were going to head and we could start to work to find the modulars,
Yeah.
and then we would have from February to March to kind of get a good idea of whether they're out there, whether we could get them, and even start working on the plans, and maybe with the idea of submitting to the city early March or after that March 9th board meeting. Yes, I think that seems like a doable timeline. Little crazy, little tight, but I think doable.
Okay, thank
It's
you.
the right amount of crazy.
Yeah.
Andy or Frank, because we're coming up on an hour and I'm hoping we can adjourn soon here. What do you all need for the next board meeting from this committee?
If I could just get the basic notes from this meeting, that would be great. Yeah.
Again, we need to know that we are in search of 4 modular classrooms and an approximate price, for material installation, and that if they can be secured, we'd be going towards the city for, permitting once units could be secured.
So in essence, for the next board meeting, I'm assuming this will be on the agenda or can be put on the agenda, and what you've heard tonight is sufficient to go forward with the sense of this group. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, we just need the minutes and again, if we know availability and rough cost of, again, what's available out there and the cost for, getting them planted out here, so to speak. It'll go on the February 9th agenda for final approval, March 9th, pending availability.
And just to be clear, this is just the 4 modular classrooms, 2 units.
That's it. Yep.
That's it. Okay. No administrative building or addition, just 4 classrooms. Got it. Thank you.
And probably a stack of umbrellas for kids to carry when they have to travel from the main building to the modulars.
Yeah.
Fair enough. It never rains around here anyway.
Hasn't.
I do want to pose one question to this group, just in the sense of planning, and Russ kind of touched on this piece here in the chat, that I think is really important and a powerful question. What is the cost of doing nothing? Because there is a cost. It may not be a dollar amount, but if you're not going to add capacity, what does that mean for the educational adequacy? If you're not going to modernize the equipment, what does that mean for mechanical systems to fail, for operations, and again, for just students and enjoying their time at school? So I don't have an answer. I don't expect an answer, but I think it's a powerful question that could be used outward facing as well as you start to ask for funding, is what is the cost of doing nothing?
To your point, Brian, we had a dual failure today in our fire alarm. We had a fire drill and we pulled the first alarm, and it took almost a full minute before it sounded through the whole school. And then it went off mysteriously afterwards. About 15 minutes later, it fired again.
That's a cost. That's expensive, right? If that was a real situation, that's life. It's not a dollar, but it's huge.
It's not measurable.
Unmeasurable, exactly. So just a powerful question, I think, gives some context to what we're talking about, right?
Well, has anybody ever thought about inviting some of our local contractors in to have Reed give them a tour of what he deals with, and ask them, well, what would you guys do? Have we ever done anything like that?
Yeah, I know Reed has networked with local contractors and that's how we stumbled upon Brian too. He's reaching out to as many
So-
resources as possible for advice.
Yeah. So it'd be great if we could just get all their name on a document that says, yeah, but this school needs to be, repaired. That might, get us over a hump that, it's going to be formidable, folks. I can see it.
Well, and if you do modernize anything in the facilities, you want to keep that work local, so the local contractors can do that work and be
Yeah.
local for service, right? And it would be beneficial for them to see the buildings, but also they might be willing to campaign for the bond if there's an opportunity for their business to make some money in the tail end.
Yeah.
Certainly, it's advantageous to keep the money within Florence.
Absolutely.
Well, I think, Brian, you raise a good point. And I think obviously our work as a committee is far from over. And in fact, which will bring me in just a second to setting up another meeting date. But I do think that we still have a lot of considerations to discuss and information to gather. And this is really, as everyone has said, and meeting an immediate need. And that, I think, we're agreed somehow needs to happen. But beyond that, we've got a lot of things to still think about. So I'd like to suggest, are there other thoughts on the subject before we set another meeting time and adjourn for the evening?
I just want to say, Bob, I really appreciate this committee. It feels like every time we meet, we make progress. I just want to say I really appreciate the ideas, the pulse of the community. And I think, it's a breath of fresh air to join this and know that we're going to continue making that progress. So just wanted to thank you guys.
Thank you, Carrie, and well said. And I certainly agree with that. It's always a pleasure to meet with you folks and hear your ideas and thinking on these processes. Thank you all. Okay, yes, Russ.
I just wanted to say back to the district folks here that we appreciate you and your leadership. It's a two-way admiration society.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Bob, I have just one more question, and this is for Super G. Do we have to, does this committee need to approve the language of a resolution? Or is there a good reason for us to need to vote on the specifics of the resolution we're going to present to the board as a committee of the board?
No.
Okay.
Because again, we're asking for permission to, again, look at availability on the 9th. And then if there is material that's found to be available between February 9th and March 9th, the board will have to make a snap approval on funding March 9th on a single read resolution, right?
Okay.
Do it. Typically, the resolutions go through first read, second read process, and they won't be able to do that. They can't delay another month. I'm sorry, my cat wants to be part of the meeting. So, yeah. And so again, we're going to see if we got all the pieces, and if the pieces are there, March 9th, then the scramble starts.
All right, fair enough. This was 2 meetings in the course of just over a week. I don't think we need to do that again. I would say maybe 3 weeks out. That's just a thought, unless somebody else has a different thought.
February 16th.
Is that what that would bring us to?
That's the week after the next board meeting.
Yeah. That sounds reasonable to me. And we'll be giving some thought to what that agenda might look like. Marlene, did you want to say something?
Yes, so our selfish timeline for the long range plan is we have until February 28th to submit that to ODE. And I know we're really working on what we do first steps. There is also the option for us to simply submit the long range plan with all of the scope that's been identified to date, right? And we just say, we have $32 million worth of work to do, and we need to replace the high school, right? I mean, we don't even necessarily need to say either or, we can quantify them both. We've talked about the options. We've done this where we actually throw in all the options that we've presented and say, these are the options that are presented. You know, we have over the next 10 years, we have time to develop exactly what we're going to do first, but this is what needs to be done. Where I think we have to be careful is what we, you know, the direction that we provide on the high school, as always. I don't know that it's really something we can say that we need to replace the high school. I think it's already stated in the assessment report that it is recommended to be replaced, just from a condition standpoint. So I think from an architectural stance, you could say that. I'm just thinking of the political sensitivity in the district. But for us, from a timing standpoint, we need to have ideally board review and approval of that long range plan prior to February 28th so that we can submit it and the district gets reimbursed.
Did you see in the chat, Marlene, Bonnie mentioned there's a potential special board meeting on the 23rd or 24th. So maybe we could touch base the week of what were we talking about, the 16th? Kind of touch base on that and then do a board approval. Would that be okay? Andy, do you think to add that to the special meeting?
Yeah, that's fine. That'll work.
Okay, so the week of the 16th, let me look from my phone here. And my calendar.
The 16th is a Wednesday, Bob.
Okay. Wednesdays for some people are not great. Let me get to that week here. I would say, let's first discuss either the 15th or the 17th. Is there?
I do have a board meeting for another district already scheduled on the 17th.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do the 15th.
They got to me early on that one.
Okay.
I can do the 15th, Bob.
15th. We're looking at the 15th here. Yes, Bob Teeter says yes. Russ says yes. Brian says yes. Dina says yes. Mike? That look all right? Okay.
Andy, are you available? That's your regularly scheduled superintendent meeting.
Oh.
In the Valley, you're muted.
Yeah. This will be an evening meeting. Yeah, I'll be back. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. So the 15th it is. At now time, we've been doing these at 6:30, and that was because of one or more. I'm not sure, Dana, if that was you or someone else had a conflict up until 6 or so. What does 6:30 work for everybody, or would you rather move it to 6 or earlier?
I would assume move it up to 6 but I'm flexible there.
Dina, what's your does that interfere
Yeah.
with something?
I'm permitted at the very earliest I could do on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night is 6:30.
That's fine then. Let's accommodate Dina, no problem.
Okay. And that works for everybody else. All right.
Okay.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bob.
Once again, a very helpful meeting. The meeting is adjourned, and have a good rest of the evening.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
You
Thank you
too.
all. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.